And I didn't know how to react to it.
Okay.
Never seen a dead body before.
Like, I saw the door of their door open and shut, and that's when she fell. Like,
this girl came out of the bushes with a bottle and just like told me to get out of the car and like grabbed me by my hair and started hitting me in the head with the bottle.
At first, investigators believed it was a tragic accident. A quiet road, a young woman, and what looked like the aftermath of a devastating hit and run. But within hours, that theory would begin to collapse. Because the woman found dead on a gravel road near South Fork Park had already called police for help just hours earlier. And the people connected to her final night would all tell a different version of the same story. The deeper detectives looked into what happened that morning. The stranger it became, prior assault, a drug deal, conflicting witness accounts, and a young woman who, according to police, may have spent her final moments fighting not to be left behind.
We have a dead body on the road.
South Fork Park?
Yes.
Okay, was the person struck by a vehicle?
No, we were driving, it's a park. We were driving on a gravel road, and it's a female person that's laying in the road.
It was supposed to be an ordinary morning. South Fork Park sat in near silence, surrounded by long stretches of gravel road and thick tree cover, the kind of place people pass through without thinking twice. But that morning, everything changed. Two men, Carl and Brandon, had arrived at the park expecting nothing unusual. It was routine, a familiar stop. Nothing about the morning suggested they were about to walk directly into the center of a homicide investigation. Before they even stepped out of their vehicle, something ahead stopped them cold. At first glance, it looked unreal. A figure lying motionless in the roadway, still, silent, completely out of place. For a moment, neither of them moved. Shock has a strange way of slowing everything down, and when something feels impossible, the brain often refuses to process it. One of the men would later admit he had never seen anything like this before.
And I didn't know how to react to it.
Okay.
Never seen a dead body before.
The closer they looked, the worse it became. A young woman, early 20s, lying in the gravel, blood visible around her. No movement, no sign of life. The damage appeared catastrophic. Severe trauma to the head. Enough that even without medical training, the men already feared the worst. Still, they called emergency services. Because when something this horrifying appears in front of you, you call. Even when part of you already knows the answer.
Was the person struck by a vehicle?
No, we were driving, it's a park. We were driving on a gravel road, and it's a female person that's laying in the road.
Within minutes, law enforcement arrived at South Fork Park. The gravel road was secured. Officers began documenting everything. Every tire mark, every object, every possible clue. Because scenes like this can disappear quickly. Rain, foot traffic, vehicles. One overlooked detail can destroy an investigation before it even begins. At first glance, detectives believed they were looking at something tragic but straightforward. A hit and run. Tire marks near the scene appeared consistent with vehicle movement. The injuries suggested impact, and the location, isolated, quiet, far from immediate help, made the theory feel possible. Someone had hit her and left, or at least, that was the first assumption.
Yet.
Okay, and you've checked for a pulse?
There's really no need to.
We're reporting live from South Fork Park, where an unidentified Hispanic woman approximately...
But investigators rarely trust first impressions, especially when the scene starts asking more questions than it answers. Nearby, scattered belongings began to complicate the picture. Items recovered from the area suggested the young woman had not simply wandered there alone. There were signs of movement, signs of recent activity, and signs that someone or multiple people may have been with her shortly before she died. Then investigators identified the victim. Her name was Darien Sather. She was 21 years old, young, complicated, and according to records, someone already known to law enforcement through prior drug-related incidents. But that alone explained nothing. A record does not explain why someone ends up dead on a gravel road. And detectives knew the answers were likely buried somewhere inside her final hours. As investigators began retracing Darien's movements, something unexpected surfaced almost immediately. Less than 12 hours earlier, Darien had already spoken with police. She had called for help, reported an assault, and described a situation that left her frightened, stranded, and without many of her belongings. At the time, officers treated it as a violent encounter requiring follow-up. But standing at South Fork Park that morning, investigators had no way of knowing that earlier call would become one of the most important pieces of the entire case. Because suddenly, this no longer looked random. This no longer looked like bad luck. And this no longer felt like a simple roadside accident. The timeline itself was beginning to break apart. The woman found on that gravel road had already been in danger once. And somehow, before the sun came up, she ended up back outside. Back around people police would later place at the center of a deadly chain of events. But how did she go from reporting violence to ending up dead just hours later? That answer started 12 hours earlier. If you're still here, then you already know something about this case doesn't add up. Before we continue, subscribe, like this video, and tell me what you think so far in the comments. Because what happened during Darien's final hours would turn what looked like a tragic hit and run into something investigators never saw coming. And it all begins with a phone call for help. 12 hours before her body was found on a gravel road, Darien Sather was alive, and she was on the phone with police, reporting that something had already gone wrong. An assault, a theft, and a situation that left her shaken, exposed, and without the basic things she had started the night with. But what investigators would later realize is that this call was only the beginning, not the end.
This girl came out of the bushes with a bottle and just told me to get out of the car and grabbed me by my hair and started hitting me in the head with the bottle.
She described being attacked. She said her belongings were taken. Her phone, her bag, even personal items she needed to move through the night safely. She didn't just sound upset. She sounded trapped in a situation she couldn't easily walk away from. And that detail would matter later, because it placed her in a vulnerable state before she ever reached South Fork Park. At some point after the call, Darien encountered law enforcement directly. She repeated what had happened, explained that she had been assaulted, and that she believed she was being targeted or threatened by people she had been around earlier that night. But even in that moment, her account wasn't fully stable. There were gaps, uncertainty, and details she seemed hesitant to fully explain. Not because she didn't know, but because she wasn't sure how much she should say.
What's your name?
Darien.
So they got your phone and what else?
A backpack with all my clothes in it. They got my purse, everything, my makeup.
After the report, officers made a decision. They gave her a ride. A simple step meant to get her away from immediate danger. But even inside that patrol car, the conversation didn't settle. She spoke about fear, about people she had just been with, and about the possibility that the situation wasn't finished yet. At one point, she even mentioned the idea of a protection order, something that suggested this wasn't a one-night problem. It was building. And then came a turning point in the conversation, a question that shifted the tone: whether drugs were involved. Darien denied it at first, but her answers weren't firm. They carried hesitation. And in police work, hesitation often speaks louder than words, because it suggests there is something still being left unsaid. Eventually, the ride ended. Darien was dropped off at her aunt's place, safe for the moment, but the situation around her was still unresolved. And investigators would later question the decision she made next. Because instead of staying put, she left again, back into the night, back into the same environment she had just been pulled out of, and toward the same circle of people tied to her earlier assault. Why she went back out is still debated. Some say she was trying to recover what she had lost. Others believe she was trying to meet someone connected to her earlier dealings. And some investigators later suggested something more specific: a connection tied to drugs, a deal, a transaction that never went the way it was supposed to. But at this point in the timeline, none of that was confirmed. Only movement, only decisions, and only a growing sense that Darien was walking deeper into danger instead of away from it. What is known is this. By early morning, Darien was headed towards South Fork Park, a location that would later become the center of the entire investigation. And she was not alone in the broader timeline of that night. Other people were moving too. Other decisions were being made. And somewhere along the way, the situation shifted from chaotic to fatal. Because just hours after leaving police protection, Darien would end up in a final encounter. One involving a vehicle, multiple individuals, and a chain of events that no one in that moment fully understood. Not even the people inside it. And what happened at that park would later divide investigators, suspects, and even witnesses into completely different versions of the truth. At this point in the timeline, Darien is still alive, but the situation around her is already starting to collapse. If you're still watching, subscribe and tell me in the comments what you think really happened here. Because in ACT3, everything converges at South Fork Park. The trucks, the people, and the moment this story turns irreversible. By the time dawn approached South Fork Park, nothing about the morning suggested violence was about to unfold. The roads were quiet, the air was still, and the gravel paths looked untouched, as if nothing significant had ever happened there before. But investigators would later describe this exact time window as the turning point. Because within minutes, multiple vehicles would converge on the same location, and Darien Sather would walk into a situation that would spiral completely out of control. Detectives later reconstructed the timeline using phone data, witness statements, and surveillance footage from nearby roads. What they found was not a random encounter. It was a sequence, a chain of arrivals, a coordinated overlap of movement that placed several people in the same remote area at nearly the same time. At the center of it all was a white truck and a young woman who had already reported being attacked just hours earlier. One of the earliest confirmed sightings showed a white truck pulling into a nearby area shortly before the encounter. Inside were individuals later identified through investigation. Among them was a man linked to the vehicle's movement throughout the morning. But at the time, there was nothing to indicate what was about to happen next. No alarm, no urgency, just routine motion, a vehicle arriving, and then leaving again. As the vehicles converged, Darien arrived at South Fork Park. According to statements later collected by investigators, this was not her first interaction with the group involved that morning. There had been contact before, prior familiarity, and a shared understanding that whatever was happening involved money and a transaction tied to drugs. But even that explanation only scratches the surface, because what unfolded next was far more chaotic than a simple exchange. Darien stepped out of a vehicle and approached the passenger side of a white truck. First, things appeared calm. There was conversation, movement, and what looked like a negotiation taking place at close range. Some witnesses later described it as almost casual, like nothing unusual was happening. But that impression didn't last long, because inside that calm, something else was building.
The first name?
Joseph.
And Caitlin, you said.
Yeah.
Is she
Caitlin Dawn on Facebook.
she white, Hispanic?
Yeah, she's white.
Okay. What about him?
He's Hispanic.
Okay. All right. And so you don't want to take any action, you just want to get the order?
Yeah.
Okay. So you remember how to do that?
Then the exchange happened. Money changed hands, or at least that's what one version of events claims. But what happened immediately after is where accounts begin to split. Because according to some statements, the situation shifted instantly. The vehicle began to move, abruptly, without warning. And in that moment, Darien reacted, not by walking away, but by holding on. Investigators later described it as a struggle at the side of the truck. Darien was no longer just standing beside the vehicle. She was now trying to maintain contact with it as it began to pull away. Whether she was trying to stop it, recover something, or resist what was happening inside, is still debated depending on which statement is referenced. But what is consistent across accounts is that she did not simply let go.
So at first it was just she was on the outside, and then she got halfway in.
Okay.
She was like halfway into the vehicle,
The truck moved faster. The distance between Darien and the vehicle changed rapidly, and what had started as a close-range interaction became a moving struggle along a gravel road. At some point, witnesses describe her position shifting along the vehicle's side, near the door, near the window, trying to keep balance as the motion increased. And then came the critical moment, the detail that would later divide the entire case. According to multiple statements, the vehicle's passenger door shifted during movement. That change created instability, and in that instability, Darien lost her grip. What happened next depends heavily on perspective. Some say she fell. Others say she was thrown by motion, and some accounts suggest she was pulled into the path of the vehicle itself after losing balance. But what investigators agreed on is that immediately after the separation from the truck, Darien was no longer outside the danger zone. She was in it. The truck did not stop. It continued forward, leaving behind confusion, panic, and conflicting interpretations of what had just occurred. Behind it, Darien remained on the gravel road, critically injured, and within moments, the scene shifted from chaotic movement to silence. By the time authorities later reconstructed the scene, they would struggle to categorize what they were looking at. Was it an accident? Was it a struggle gone wrong? Or was it something more intentional that unfolded in seconds too fast to fully process? At this stage, there were no clear answers, only competing narratives, and a growing list of people whose versions of events did not fully align. At this point, Darien's final moments are no longer in question. What remains unclear is intent. Subscribe now to Criminal Instincts with S-Day, because in ACT4, investigators begin breaking down the contradictions, the statements, the shifting blame, and the physical evidence that does not fully match what some witnesses claimed happened that morning. After Darien Sather's body was found at South Fork Park, the case should have been simple: clear accident, a single sequence of events, a timeline investigators could confidently reconstruct. But the deeper they dug, the more the story fractured, because every witness account, every suspect statement, and every piece of physical evidence began pointing in different directions. At first, investigators focused on the obvious: a vehicle, a gravel road, and multiple people present during the critical moments. But as interviews were conducted, pattern emerged, not of clarity, but of contradiction. One version said Darien fell. Another said she was holding onto the vehicle. Another said she was pushed. And another suggested she was trying to climb inside. All describing the same moment, but none agreeing on what actually caused her death.
And like holding onto the handle.
Which handle are we referring to?
I call it the oh shit handle.
It's an interior handle on the roof.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's like holding onto that, and she's like crawling into the car, and it looked like she was crawling into the car. And then we got into gear, so that's our little burnout right there from the car.
Okay.
We started falling.
And who was driving?
Malachi.
Malachi.
Yeah.
And where were you sitting in your vehicle? That vehicle.
Passenger.
Okay. And where was she sitting at when you guys arrived?
In the back seat, I'm pretty sure on my side. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, on my side. And then we got around this corner.
So let me back up a second. You said it looked like she was crawling into the truck. What do you mean by that?
Like I see it, she clearly got into it. Like she was trying to save the money.
Okay. So how much of her body could you see inside the vehicle, in the truck?
So at first it was just she was on the outside, and then she got halfway in.
Okay.
She was like halfway into the vehicle, like by like her stomach or waist.
One witness described seeing Darien gripping the vehicle as it moved. Another said she was halfway inside the truck. A third account introduced something more violent: a taser, used during the struggle. a detail that immediately changed how investigators viewed the encounter. Because if true, it suggested Darien was not just involved in a chaotic movement of a vehicle, but actively being subdued during it. Forensic examination added another layer of complexity. Investigators noted injuries that raised questions, not just from impact with a vehicle, but also marks that appeared inconsistent with a simple fall. These findings did not confirm a narrative, but they forced a deeper investigation into what happened inside those final seconds at the truck. Because the physical evidence was no longer supporting a single explanation, it was supporting multiple possibilities.
We know that you know why you're here. We just want you to explain to us what actually happened, Brent. You had a bird's eye view of everything, so why don't you go ahead and tell us what's going on, buddy?
These guys had me give them a ride to meet some people. Apparently, something to do with she had robbed this guy or got stabbed, or he got stabbed or some shit, and then...
What was his name, Brent? Peyton?
As suspects were brought in, their stories began to shift. One person minimized their role entirely. Another admitted to being present but denied direct involvement. And another attempted to redirect responsibility toward a different individual altogether. Each statement contained small overlaps of truth, but none aligned perfectly. And in homicide investigations, inconsistency is often more important than detail, because lies rarely fail in one place. They fail in many. Then came the surveillance footage. Multiple cameras captured the same individuals before and after the incident. What stood out wasn't just their presence, but their behavior afterward. No emergency calls, no visible panic, no immediate attempt to report what had happened. Instead, routine movement, driving, stopping, refueling, as if nothing irreversible had occurred only moments earlier. This created a critical problem for investigators. If Darien's death was purely accidental, why did the people involved not act like witnesses to a tragedy? And if it wasn't accidental, then the coordination of events before and after the incident began to look very different, deliberate, structured, and far more serious.
Going fine. The gal got out of the car. She went over to Peyton's window, and they were talking. I think they even smoked a little bit. And
did he ever give her any of them that?
Yeah, I saw him pass her a bag.
Okay. Did it look like an ounce?
It didn't look like an ounce.
Okay.
It didn't look like an ounce, and then I think that's when Peyton said go.
Okay.
And then the driver's like, what? Peyton's like, go, go, go. And then the driver sped off.
Okay.
And the gal jumped onto the truck.
Jumped on the truck where?
So, like basically on the passenger side, and then at one point was like kind of in the center of the hood, center of the vehicle, and then
okay.
It was like
So she's not on the running board. She's on the hood of the car?
Yeah, I swear to God, this sounds like something out of a fucking movie. And then the dude slammed on the brakes. Okay. And then kept going.
Okay. Then what happened?
He didn't stop.
What did you hear, or what did you see? So she's on the hood of the car. He slams on the brakes. What happened then, Tyler?
He kept going. He never stopped. I could see the girl, and she was trying to sit up. She wasn't dead right there. She didn't die from just getting ran over. But nobody would stop. I'm yelling at Brent to stop. I'm begging him, pleading him to stop. It's not my gig. That is not my... Brent's a fucking sociopath.
By this stage of the investigation, every person involved was attempting to separate themselves from responsibility. One blamed the driver. The driver blamed the situation. Others blamed fear, confusion, and intoxication during the events. But none of those explanations could fully resolve what investigators were seeing. Because the timeline itself was no longer stable. It was being rebuilt, statement by statement, and then investigators noticed something important, a shift in the narrative. Earlier statements had described confusion, but later statements began introducing certainty, specific actions, specific roles, and specific blame directed at individuals who were not originally central to the story. One name in particular began appearing more frequently, not as a bystander, but as a focal point of responsibility. As pressure increased during questioning, stories began to tighten, details changed, and contradictions became harder to maintain. Investigators were no longer just listening for what was said. They were listening for what changed between interviews, because in cases like this, the truth is often revealed in revision, not in the first statement, but in the second. CTA. By now, the case is no longer about what happened at South Fork Park. It is about what each person is trying to avoid admitting. Now, subscribe to Criminal Instinct with Estee for more crime stories. In ACT 5, investigators close in on the final reconstruction of events. Arrests are made, charges are filed, and the truth begins to take its final shape. By the time investigators reached the final stage of the case, the story of Darien Sather's death was no longer just about a single moment on a gravel road. It had become something larger, a chain of decisions, a collapsing timeline, and a group of people whose stories could no longer stay aligned. Because when detectives finally put all the statements together, a clearer picture began to emerge, one that no single suspect fully admitted to, but one that the evidence refused to ignore. Investigators concluded that the events leading to Darien's death were not isolated. They were connected. A meeting had taken place at South Fork Park involving multiple individuals. A transaction was underway. Money was exchanged, and Darien found herself in the middle of a situation that escalated far beyond what anyone claimed to have intended. But what happened next was where every version of the story began to collapse under pressure. According to the final reconstruction, Darien became physically entangled with the vehicle during the attempt to leave the scene. Whether she was trying to stop it, retrieve something, or resist what had already taken place, remains disputed. But what investigators agreed on was this: she did not simply step away, she held on, and in holding on, she entered the most dangerous part of the sequence. During the struggle, force was introduced into the situation. Accounts referenced the use of a taser during the confrontation. That detail changed everything, because it suggested Darien was not only reacting to a moving vehicle, but also being actively subdued during the encounter. In the chaos that followed, the vehicle began moving faster, control was lost, and Darien's grip began to fail. Then came the critical break in contact, the exact moment that divided every statement in the case. Darien lost her hold on the vehicle, and in that instant, she fell into the path of danger. Whether it was caused by momentum, loss of balance, or sudden movement of the vehicle, the result was the same. She hit the ground, hard. The vehicle did not immediately stop. It continued forward, leaving behind confusion and chaos in seconds that no one involved could fully process. Behind it, Darien was left on the gravel road, severely injured, and unable to recover from the impact. By the time anyone truly understood the severity of what had happened, it was already too late. As investigators finalized their report, they determined that the incident could not be treated as a simple accident. Too many contributing actions were present. Too many decisions had escalated the situation, and too many individuals had played roles that directly affected the outcome. What might have begun as a transaction had escalated into a fatal chain of events. Eventually, arrests followed. Multiple individuals connected to the case were taken into custody. Charges were initially severe, including first-degree murder and robbery-related offenses. But as the legal process unfolded, the outcome shifted. Plea agreements were reached, and the final convictions were reduced from the original charges.
Having found you guilty on all counts, this court sentences you to the maximum penalty allowed by law.
In the end, The individuals involved received prison sentences tied to manslaughter convictions, years behind bars, followed by probation periods after release. Not the outcome originally charged, but still a recognition of responsibility in the events that led to Darien Sather's death. But even after sentencing, one question remained unanswered. Was this a planned robbery that spiraled out of control, or a chaotic situation where fear, drugs, and panic turned a routine exchange into something fatal? Because every version of the story still leaves something unresolved, and that uncertainty is what continues to define the case today. Darien Sather's final hours began with a call for help, and ended on a gravel road where multiple stories collided, but only one outcome remained permanent. Her case serves as a reminder that, in moments of panic and poor decisions, situations can escalate far beyond anyone's control. And when they do, there is rarely a version of events that feels complete. Final CTA. If you watched this far, what do you think really happened at South Fork Park? Was it an accident born from chaos, or a situation that was already out of control long before that final moment? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more true crime breakdowns like this, subscribe and stay tuned for the next case.